What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 100% that simply were not worth the effort involved. Though I realize that even in saying that, and something people were probably thinking when they clicked on the video, is that for a lot of people, no 100% is worth the effort, and fair enough, I suppose, but, I'm the one making the video, I guess, so here we are. And for me, as somebody who 100%s a lot of games, it's a slightly different story in the sense that I obviously enjoy that process a fair bit, and even I can admit, however, that there are some games that simply fall flat in that regard, where, if anything, trying to get 100% on them is a bit of a detriment to the overall experience, I would say. Now, I've been doing this long enough, and I know myself well enough to kind of just cut my losses when I'm ready to stop, and that's why you guys occasionally get like a regular review as an example, because I know what my personal limits are, and yet there are some games where I find myself completing the 100% almost just hoping for there to be something more underneath, and ultimately finding myself disappointed at the end of the road, if you will. And while it's not exactly the most cheery subject in the world, exactly those situations is kind of what I want to sit here and talk about with you guys today. And we're going to kick it off nice and easy with a pretty recent one, actually, with Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. Now, there are several reasons I was feeling like this was not worth the effort at the end of the day. And while I'm sure plenty of people will jump straight away to it not being a good game, this, that, and the other, and that's fine if that's the reason for you, but for me it's a little more complicated than that, because on one hand, while this is a perfectly fine sort of vampire action game on its own, I also think it's a poor sequel to the original Bloodlines. That is as good a place as any to start, but that's not really why the 100% was a bit of a letdown to me. Initially, it was just the repetition of it. You see, in order to 100% this game, you need to beat the game as every clan, and while that's not a terrible thing to do necessarily, as in order to get like some of the different endings and stuff, you're going to have to play through the game a bit differently anyway, so it's not exactly the end of the world to do that. However, 6 times gets a little tedious, and up until here recently, it was even worse than that, because a significant portion of the game were the Fabian sections, where you played a detective just running around talking to people. And so for each of those 6 playthroughs, a sizable chunk of it, you would be put into another character's shoes and literally just be forced to walk around, talk to people, get answers, and solve the investigation, and even doing it as quickly as possible, it's boring. Now, thankfully, here in a recent patch, they added a custom difficulty that will allow you to, of course, customize a bunch of options, but one of them is to skip those sections, so it is a bit easier for people now. But I'm going to take it one step farther, because even after doing all of that, it was my, I would say, extreme displeasure to find that the game initially had a bugged completionist achievement, that is to say, the one for getting all the achievements. It was bugged out, which didn't get fixed for a couple of more weeks, so even after suffering through all of that tedium, the reward at the end was bugged out, and they eventually had to fix it. All in all, it just kind of left a sour taste in my mouth on top of everything else, and I found myself very frustrated with it. And that is actually probably not even the end of the story, really, because this game is getting 2 DLC that will presumably add achievements, so I'm likely going to play it again in some capacity, and I guess we'll see what happens there, but I was less than enthused at the end of that one. Now, for this next entry, I want to talk about a game whose ending just kind of ruined the whole thing for me, and that is actually the DioField Chronicle, which is a game from a few years ago that is unique in the sense that it is a real-time with pause tactical RPG. Those are actually a rare breed. Most tactical RPGs are turn-based. You can find a few real-time with pause ones, like the DioField Chronicle as an example, but they are few and far between. The game also had some other issues when it initially launched, like the fact that you could sneeze at this game and beat it. It was just very, very easy. They later on added like a hard mode to address a little bit of that. There was also the fact that the story was a little disjointed in how it was told. They even, again, added some stuff later to fill in some of that. And I mentioned those things just to say that even at the beginning of the experience, there were some issues. But what really ultimately kind of bummed me out about this particular particular instance is that the ending kind of just straight up ruins the game for me. Now, I mean, you play enough games, you're going to have some endings you don't necessarily enjoy, or stories you don't necessarily agree with, like how they ended, that kind of thing. That is just the way that goes. But I will say it is rare that a game's story just straight up makes me angry, and that is the way the ending in the DioField Chronicle hits. It comes out of left field, it recontextualizes the entire game, and not in a good way. And with the way this game was structured, that came right at the end of the experience. And so while it wasn't a particularly difficult setup or overall experience, I would say it just kind of dropped the ball so incredibly hard right at the end of the experience that it kind of just, again, ruined the entire thing for me. Going through all that trouble only for the sort of finale to just be garbage. Interesting systems in that one, if nothing else, though. But in a sort of polar opposite situation, in some ways I guess you could say, is Deathbound. Deathbound is effectively a Souls-like that sees you taking on the role of characters via like their essences that you could freely swap between to set up combos and stuff like that, which was a really interesting concept, and that's what drew me to it to begin with. And from what I understand, it shares some DNA with things like Mortal Shell, but I haven't played that, to be clear. But obviously it ran into some problems. So straight away, it's a game that is a little bit clunky on the movement side of things. It's a AA Souls-like, and that's always going to be a difficult thing to pull off at the end of the day. And that's before you get into all of the character swapping. One of the biggest problems it had, I don't know if they fixed this after the fact or not, but at least when I played it, because of the way healing worked, it would spread the health from your characters around more or less, and this resulted in a situation where the 3 characters you are not actively using as your setup might, as a result of the way that healing system works, lose more health than you gain. Meaning that in a sort of bizarre situations, there were times with this game where healing would actually make things worse for you, not better. And not in like I stopped and got hit or whatever. I mean, it would literally lose you overall health. And to me, that's just like a fundamentally flawed system. And it was in dealing with that over the course of my time with that game that I came to realize that I just overall didn't like the experience. And in order for it to be something I would have liked, they would have had to have overhauled that entire system, basically. So I wanted to include Deathbound because it's one of the games on here that I just straight up did not like, and as a result, it simply wasn't worth the effort at the end of that experience. But I suppose you could say that it is with that experience I was able to deterministically be like, yeah, this is just 100% not for me, as it turns out. Either way, though, a couple more to go. Second to last, we have Phantom Doctrine. Phantom Doctrine is an espionage TRPG that honestly does some cool things. However, it has one fatal flaw that is also not a particularly complicated one. It simply does not have enough variation and content to last for how long they want you to play the game, especially if you want to 100% it. The reason being that Phantom Doctrine is the type of game where once you've played it for about 10 hours, you've seen more or less everything it's got to show you. There really isn't much else to do outside of some unique cutscenes and things like that, because after you beat the game the first time, you unlock Extended Mode. Extended Mode allows you to basically see more of the story and get at, I guess what you could call like a true ending, as an example. The problem with that is that is buried deep into a game where you have almost certainly seen everything the game has to show you well before the end of your first playthrough, let alone a second playthrough. And in order to even get to that point, there's just so much tedious stuff you gotta do. The investigation board even starts to repeat, where you're basically just like matching up words and stuff in order to figure some things out. The missions and the biomes and the backgrounds, all that stuff starts to repeat, and there's only so many ways you can interact with the agents before you get them on the scene, and you just get to a point where every mission plays out more or less the exact same way as you grind for an exceedingly long time to get this small payoff of those extra scenes and stuff at the back half, and it's just way too long for what it is. It has a lot of pacing issues, and I think you could have cut the time involved by like half, and it still maybe would have felt a little long. And considering the extra like extended mode stuff isn't even that crazy anyway, it just really did not feel like it was worth the effort at the end of the day. But that does bring us to our final entry, and it is none other than Final Fantasy VII's Rebirth as part of the Remake trilogy. On one hand, I think Rebirth is a lot of fun. A reimagining and much prettier looking version, if you will, of one of the best Final Fantasy titles. There's a lot to enjoy there, especially some refinements and improvements they made from the first part of the trilogy, Intergrade, and by and large, it's an enjoyable experience. So what is it doing on this list? Well, simply put, there is way too much filler here. I talked about this in my review for it, actually. In order to 100% Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, you're going to find yourself doing an incredible amount of things like all sorts of different mini-games, activities, etc. And while plenty of that stuff is fine, the part that gets me the most personally is the mini-games in particular. There's just so many of them, and a lot of them have like their own entire like difficulty thing you gotta get used to, how they ramp up, how they work, stuff like that. And while some of them absolutely have some tricks and stuff to be beaten, some of them are just extraordinarily painful. Like for me personally, the worst one was the piano. It is, from what I understand, equally terrible on both keyboard and mouse as well as controller. It's just a really awkward control scheme as you try to also deal with the weird UI that is this mini game. It's just painful all the way around. And the crazy part is that's just one of the mini games that you will have to master in order to 100% this thing. And it just goes on and on and on, which put me in a weird situation for a review for this channel specifically. But the gist of it was basically that while I would very much recommend the overall game as it was fun and everything, what I can't really recommend is that anybody try to 100% it because it simply wasn't worth the effort. I think I actually probably would have enjoyed this game more if I had just beaten it, did the stuff that I felt like doing, and called it a day. All of those mini games in particular made the 100% on this just an exhausting experience. Which is why I figured I'd give it the top spot, as I think it was probably the most fitting for what this particular video was all about. But that is where we are going to wrap it up. There has been 5 100% that I don't think were particularly worth the effort, but if you have games you feel similarly about, or there was a 100% you just especially loved, as some games I think also kind of do the opposite of this, where it's a really rewarding 100%, I'd love to hear about that too. Which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.